Hey guys, what is up? It's me, EDJ, and we are starting a brand new series by Kings and Generals, and this one is about the Imjin War. Now, I'm actually not a stranger to this conflict, or rather, I'm familiar with a certain person, Admiral Yi. We covered Extra History's Admiral Yi series, and it definitely was a really great series. We covered it early 2025, I believe. So I think maybe yeah, like around January or around there um, of 2025. So yeah, it's been like over a year now, and all I remember is Admiral Yi obviously just dominating the seas and his innovations like with the turtle ship and just constantly defeating the Japanese even when numerically outnumbered. And obviously I don't think it's all going to be about Admiral Yi. There's going to probably be a much bigger scope since it's the war in total, but I am really excited to see old Yi back and through a different perspective, you know? And how Kings and Generals will be discussing him. And what else was I gonna say? Yeah, I don't really have actually much else to add, other than I'm really excited to get into this, and this kind of feels like a great sequel after the Sengoku Jidai series, since both events took place at the same time. So, yeah, I'm really excited, so I don't want to yap anymore, I want to get right into it. If you want to watch the original video by Kings and Generals, the link is down in the description down below, and if you enjoy my content and you want to help me out in my noble goal of achieving 1,000 subscribers, feel free to please like, comment, and subscribe, it would really help me out a lot. And maybe consider becoming a member. Now with that said, and now without any further ado, let's get to it, shall we? Let us watch the Imjin War Part 1 by the Great Kings and Generals.
Japan, at the dawn of the 17th century, was entering a new epoch. The country had just been united, and thus the Sengoku Jidai, a near century and a half of endemic feudal warfare, had come to an end. Peace proved to be yet another challenge for the new overlord Toyotomi Hideyoshi, for his country was now home to hundreds of thousands of warriors with no war left to fight. Thus Hideyoshi turned his ambitions outwards, and now that he could harness some of the most veteran armies in Japanese history, he would launch a devastating invasion of Korea. Welcome to the new Kings and Generals video on the Imjin War. These long videos are very difficult to make, so consider subscribing, liking, sharing and commenting to earn us some grace with the gods of the algorithm. You can support us via Patreon, the link in the description, or via YouTube membership, the button is under the video. In the last 2 decades of the 16th century, the great warlord Toyotomi Hideyoshi had more or less achieved his goal of uniting Japan's many warring fiefs. In 1582, he claimed Honshu in its entirety after succeeding his betrayed master Oda Nobunaga. Shikoku was then subdued in 1585, and Kyushu fell soon after in 1587. As the land of the rising sun came ever closer to unification, all rival daimyo who swore to follow Hideyoshi were allowed to keep their domains and were promised more lands and spoils. However, once Japan was unified, lands and spoils would be hard to deliver on, as there would be no more battles to fight or gains to be had. Aware of this fact, he made plans to turn his vassals outwards in the late 1580s, hungrily eyeing Korea as the initial target, and the Chinese Ming.
Honestly, it is a really good move to make. Again, as we did cover the Sengoku Jidai series, I'm almost tempted to call this month Asian month. Like, almost as a joke, I've been calling this month that because of all the, you know, videos and series we've been looking on in this channel this month have all basically been in Asia. But, point is, we watched the Sengoku Jidai series, and we saw all of Hideyoshi's exploits, and I'm really happy to just know who he is. So, like, when this series is starting, and a lot of familiar names and faces will pop back up, which I'm really happy about. And that's the thing, we saw, like, all what the heck was going on in Japan, and it's just really smart of him I mean, granted, we know this ends up horribly for him, and kind of like not a great moment in his otherwise very almost flawless track record. But point is, that's with the benefit of hindsight knowing. At the time, I think this was just a really smart move on his part to just, you know, get, now that he's gotten everyone together, you know, Japan still kind of, you know, any wrong moves, things could, I guess you can say, not go so hot. So to focus everyone's attention on an outside, you know, force or factor, like, oh, look, expand, gain more land, conquest, you know, and kind of get everyone's eyes off each other and onto like a singular foreign enemy, I think is a really smart move actually on his part. Like I said, with the benefit of hindsight, it doesn't go well. Um, but still a very smart, I think at the time, a very good, shrewd move.
Empire after that. These invasion plans were more than an artful solution to keep his belligerent, warlike vassals busy. Like Nobunaga before him, Hideyoshi believed that his power ought to extend beyond the confines of his small island nation, and was convinced his destiny was to conquer further afield. The Great Unifier's most recent conquest was the island of Tsushima, located at the midpoint of the Tsushima Strait. The lords of this clan, the So, had since become Hideyoshi's vassals, and were ordered to deliver a message to the Koreans, which demanded their submission to the Japanese state. This put the So in a difficult spot, for their long relations with the Korean Joseon monarchy made them ideal diplomats, but an outbreak of hostilities between Korea and Japan would damage the trade which granted the clan much of its wealth. Aiming to soften the diplomatic blow as much as he could, So Yoshishige altered Hideyoshi's message to the Korean court, blunting much of its threats and demands, and changing it so that it stipulated only a simple tribute mission be sent to Japan in order to confirm Korea's respect. However, this plan would backfire. In a lethal blunder, the So clan leader sent a rough, hardened subordinate, known as Yutani Yasuhiro, to deliver the message, instead of going himself. Yasuhiro conducted himself in the most indelicate way possible, insulting his Korean hosts by degrading the size of their spears compared to the Japanese, and mocking their lifestyle. Not content with that,
dang, he's on his like Roman diplomat mindset. You know, it's like kind of like the fun things that when you learn about how the Romans, especially the early Romans, conducted diplomacy, really was just super rude, and they just showed up, and basically it was more, they were less diplomats and more just like, what's the saying? Just there to shake everyone down, like you do what we say or else. It worked though for them. They had the power to back it up, but that's funny.
the brash envoy warned, "Your country will not last long. Having already lost the sense of order and discipline, how can you expect to survive?" The uncouth nature of the envoy's conduct and the unacceptable demand led to the Korean refusal to pay any form of submission or respect to Hideyoshi.
Dang.
Naturally, Hideyoshi was furious at the failure.
I kind of wonder if he hadn't sent him. I wonder. I'm like alternate history scenario. Let's just say he went himself. I'm wondering if that could have worked. His plan to like soften the blow. Like he already made the effort to like, you know, basically dial down Hideyoshi's threats. So I'm wondering if like he could have gotten away with it if he had gone personally and, you know, not sent that dude. Because this, if it could have worked and this dude like started a war, started the hostilities that maybe could have potentially been avoided, which is funny to think. But yeah.
And ordered that Yasuhiro and his entire family be killed. So Yoshishige was punished less severely, being replaced as daimyo of Tsushima by his adopted son Yoshitoshi, who Hideyoshi considered more trustworthy. Over the next few years, more embassies were sent from Japan to Korea and vice versa. In a crucial visit to Kyoto in 1590, Korean courtiers failed to gather intelligence on just how powerful Hideyoshi's military was, leading their government to underestimate the imminent danger. Furthermore, the issue divided the Korean court factions, named for the location of their respective headquarters in Seoul. Members of the Westerner faction gradually came to realize the very real peril Japan posed, but any attempt to prepare for the invasion was actively opposed by the Easterner group. In Japan, a colossal war machine was gearing up in the summer of 1591, beginning with Hideyoshi's establishment of a newly fortified headquarters complex on the island of Kyushu. From there, he oversaw the levying of a massive army comprising 335,000 total troops, 158,000 of which would cross to Korea itself. The levies were raised by Japan's various daimyo lords, who, in a system known as gunyaku, were obliged to supply a predetermined number of men according to the size and wealth of their fiefdom. Beyond that, other political factors could influence a daimyo's required contribution, such as their personal standing with Hideyoshi. The 158,000-strong invasion force consisted of 82,200 men from Kyushu, which was closest to Korea, 57,000 from Honshu, and 19,600 from Shikoku. How this giant force was equipped must be discussed for a moment to deconstruct the commonly held romantic notions of what the Japanese armies of this age looked like. Rather than a noble force of katana-wielding samurai, the majority of Hideyoshi's invading troops were instead humble ashigaru, peasant foot soldiers armed with swords, spears, and bows. Perhaps one-third of this army was armed with arquebuses, an early form of firearm introduced to Japan by the Portuguese, who had made landfall in Kyushu some decades earlier. Hideyoshi's plan was to be a domino rolling through Asia. When the Koreans were conquered, they were to supply manpower and material for the push into China. When the area around Beijing was conquered, that area would supply manpower for a push further into the Middle Kingdom, and so on. The invading force would be ferried to Korea by 700 assorted ships, which, along with their crews, were requisitioned from the various daimyo of the coastal provinces. These were mostly repurposed merchant or civilian vessels. Though Hideyoshi had a massive army at his disposal, in addition to high-quality military technology on land, naval power would prove a problem for him throughout the coming conflict. In contrast, the Koreans had just two advantages over the Japanese: their superior shipbuilding and cannon technology. These upsides, however, were overshadowed by the fact that corruption in Korea was rampant, leaving military units neglected, untrained, and lazy. As a whole, the Joseon Kingdom was not ready for the storm that was coming. However, one man within it, later to become Korea's most venerated war hero, certainly was: the 46-year-old Korea soldier Yi Sun-shin. After being assigned to Cholla in late...
Yeah, there's the man, the myth, the legend. I hope that is Yi, right? Hopefully, I'm not confusing him for a completely different person. I'd be like, oh, that's racist. Oh, everyone called Yi. No, I think that's Yi. I feel safe in that. Yeah, like I remember the Extra History series, and basically, yeah, Yi could really instill a lot of discipline, and really got, anyone under his control basically back into being an actual proper force. Because again, yeah, the Korean politics were awful. the corruption, the bad decision, the government was just awful, bro. And the several times that they basically got rid of Yi were some of the most frustrating moments in that series, because I haven't been that upset since like the Belisarius series by Epic History, which is still the least favorite series I've ever watched. Like, of all the series we have ever watched on this channel, the Belisarius one is the one that I don't like, and not because it's bad or that Epic History did a bad job. It's just, it made me unhappy. Like, I've never been more unhappy after a series than I was with Belisarius, and I was just like, Justinian, can you stop like disgracing this dude? And just, I don't know, I was just sad. I was like, poor Belisarius to this day. Admiral Yi, it's a bit, is a bit different. Like he's close to it, but I still enjoyed the series maybe because he still he went out with a bang. He went out at um much more appreciated, at least compared to Belisarius, you know, and he got to come back and win one giant last hurrah. So I was really happy for Yi. That's kind of what saved it. Or if he had just like kind of like nod, I would have been like, ugh, you know. But yeah, poor Yi. He deserved better, but the man was a true Chad.
1590, Yi immediately understood that his province could serve as a possible beachhead for an invasion. Determined to be as prepared as he could, he spent a year diligently studying naval command, whipping his men into shape, and repairing infrastructure. Meanwhile, after being delayed multiple times, 3 contingents of the first wave of Japanese invaders were ready to sail by May 22nd. On the 23rd, 18,700 troops under the command of Konishi Yukinaga and So Yoshitoshi set out for Busan. It was a risky voyage, for the warships earmarked to guard the troop transports had not arrived, and so this fleet was completely vulnerable. Though initially believing the ships on the horizon were part of an abnormally large trade mission, the Korean commanders in the Busan region gradually came to realize that the invasion had begun. They could have used the superior warships under their command to assault the undefended Japanese fleet, but in a catastrophic lack of decisiveness and initiative, they failed to do so. By nightfall on May 23rd, around 400 transports crowded the waters off Busan, resting in the harbour completely unopposed. After a
Yeah, again, it goes to show you just there's a lot of incompetence among the Korean higher ups at the time, and they basically allowed Japan to get a foothold and get on the they didn't utilize their superior or better, naval capabilities to its full potential for a while, at least until Admiral Yi shows up and makes everything better, Yeah, and I remember from like the series, the Japanese were actually very effective on the land campaign, because there's the Yi campaign on the sea, and then there's the land campaign for the Japanese forces that actually made it on land, and I believe the Korean forces on land did not do well for a large part of it. So yeah.
A final demand for an unopposed Japanese crossing to China was rejected, the troop landings began. At 4 AM on May 24th, 1592, 5,000 men under Yoshitoshi disembarked onto land, followed by another 7,000 under Yukinaga. Eventually, the entire first contingent had disembarked, and a Japanese army had landed on Korean soil without a single shot being fired. After 2 brief sieges, the main fortresses at Busan and its harbour fell, triggering panic among military leaders in surrounding provinces. In yet another stunning act of military ineptitude, the incompetent Korean naval commanders scuttled their sizable provincial fleets and destroyed their weaponry and provisions, retreating north as quickly as they could. With Busan secured, the proud Yukinaga...
Yeah. Okay, I think it speaks for itself.
refused to wait for reinforcements as instructed. Instead, he immediately pushed north along the middle of the peninsula on May 26th, marching at a blistering pace, likely wishing to monopolize the glory of seizing the capital for himself. This invading force first came to the deserted town of Yangsan, then went on to secure Miryang and Daegu on May 28th, pillaging and plundering as they did. Realizing he had to mount some opposition, the governor of Gyeongsang province, Kim Su, tried to lead a force south to meet the Japanese. However, he soon withdrew without fighting after learning that Dongnae had also fallen. News of the Japanese invasion had reached Yi Sun-shin in Chola on May 25th, along with the shocking knowledge that both of the Gyeongsang navies had already self-destructed. However, Yi waited patiently. He had orders to defend his segment of the coastline, and would do so. he remained confident that the Japanese could be defeated on the seas, despite their superiority on land, so Yi was biding his time. Meanwhile, a second Japanese army landed in Busan on May 28th, under the command of Kato Kiyomasa. The troopships this time disgorged a fearsome contingent of 22,800 soldiers. Realizing that the vanguard under Yukinaga had not waited for him, the irritated Kiyomasa also swiftly pushed forward. He took the eastern route, seizing the cities of Ulsan, Gyeongju, Yeongcheong, Sinyeong, and Kumo on the path to Seoul.
You know, I must say, it is amazing that the Koreans managed to prevail, considering this awful start, and the fact that, you know, the Japanese had gotten a foothold. But, you know, it really does go to show you, the capabilities. Like, we've seen in the past, island nations, like the UK, for example, have amazing defense. Like, with a strong enough navy, they can basically be untouchable. Like, you're not getting there, you know. Hitler tried, he failed. Napoleon tried, he failed. Like, on the defensive, the capabilities are amazing, and you could, if with enough competence and preparation, almost untouchable. But I guess kind of on the flip side, it can kind of work as that too. Like, you know, if they go on the attack and they try to attack like a well-fortified enemy, they can get pushed back. So I don't know, it kind of seems like it can kind of have an adverse, and I think this war kind of proves that, is that Yi realized just the power of naval superiority and really, again, pushed it to its full potential. And you could see how, despite, you know, on paper, this would kind of be it, right? Like, without hindsight, let's take away the hindsight, let's take away the, you know, everything. Let's just, know the power of the Japanese, you know, land force, and then know that Korea's land force is not as good, and then just, you know, on paper, this would be it. Like, they have a foothold, they're in, like, everything, it's only a matter of time. But again, if I'm remembering correctly, Extra Histories series is that Admiral Yi managed to basically blockade any more Japanese vessels coming, you know, delivering supplies or just sending reinforcements, which left the land forces kind of trapped. So I think he kind of really did show the capabilities of it, and just it's something really impressive, you know. That's just really cool to see.
Kiyomasa blazed with determination, resolved not to let his rival Yukinaga reach the capital before him. On the 28th, a third prong of the invasion opened up when Hideyoshi's third contingent under Kureda Nagamasa arrived at Angolpo. This force consisted of 11,000 troops, who, after seizing the nearby fort at Kimhae, would take the western route north. 3 Japanese armies were now set to converge on the Korean capital at Seoul, but they would not get to the city totally unopposed. At Cheongju, around 100 kilometers south of the capital, the revered Joseon general Sin Rip had assembled a sizable resistance army of 8,000, and he intended to fight. The ragtag agglomeration of cavalry troops, officers who had retreated from the south, and hastily raised levies from the north possibly could have held the Choyong Pass, which had been General Sin's original plan. However, retreating Korean units revealed that it had already been lost, so instead, Sin chose to do battle at Cheongju on an open field. At midday on June 6, 1592, as the Japanese were descending from the Choyong Heights, General Sin drew up his army outside Cheongju on a stretch of flat ground, hemmed in by a hill called Tangumdae to their flank and the South Han River behind them. This was a death trap with no possibility of retreat, and this was precisely the point. Placing troops in this kind of situation was a long-established Chinese military tactic, which had led to remarkable victories in the past. Perhaps the Koreans could use it to halt the robbers, as they derisively called the Japanese.
So basically, there's no hope of running away. So you this is just an assumption on my part. I don't fully know, but like what my mind is thinking of is okay. Put your soldiers in a position where they know they can't escape, and then they're gonna fight like they're gonna fight even more fiercely because they know okay. Even if we lose, there's no way we're running away. The only way to survive is to win. I guess it's sort of like a desperate, all-for-nothing mentality, which can actually be really effective. Um, like, we've seen it before that soldiers can fight even more fiercely, with kind of like the saying, like, you're a cornered animal, like, kind of to show when people become more desperate and just, like, you know, when they see that there's no other way out. So it actually can work, and at least could probably, if not win, inflict a lot more heavy casualties. So I do kind of, again, if my thoughts are correct, or at least close to correct, I think that's a interesting move. And I could definitely see the thought process behind it, you know?
As Yukonaga's first contingent descended from the heights, Kiyomasa emerged from the eastern route and managed to catch up with his rival daimyo near Cheongju. The latter was angered that Yukonaga had stolen the glory by storming ahead and demanded to now take the lead with his own force. He refused, and Kiyomasa decided that he would take revenge on his rival at Cheongju.
Oh boy.
As Yukonaga began his advance towards the city from the southeast, the second contingent stayed behind, hoping their rivals would be defeated. The attacking troops fanned out as they approached the town, finally emerging opposite General Sin's force in a vast arc. At 2 PM on the afternoon of June 6th, Yukonaga divided his army into 3 main units. 10,000 soldiers under himself and his retainer Matsura Shigenobu formed the vanguard, while So Yoshitoshi and his 5,000-strong contingent formed the left flank. Finally, 3,700 assorted troops, commanded by their minor daimyos, Arima Harunobu, Omura Yoshiaki, and Goto Sumeharu, were placed on the right. Arquebusiers were placed on the front lines of the Japanese army, while behind them stood Ashigaru footmen, armed with melee weapons. When arrayed in battle formation, the Japanese advanced with a roar of musket fire. It was hardly even a contest. General Sin's amateur forces were almost immediately overwhelmed by flying arquebus balls and began to suffer devastating losses. The peasant soldiers began to rout under the pressure, but the brave general would not retreat so easily. He led his crack cavalry in a headlong charge towards the enemy line. It was to no avail. The arquebusiers rained withering musket fire down on his horsemen, breaking the charge before any contact was made. In short order, General Sin's 8,000-strong army had ceased to exist. Many survivors.
They didn't even get to the enemy line, at least the way that Kings and Generals is portraying it. But they didn't even get to the enemy line. They got decimated on... Oh, dang, that's actually embarrassing. Oh, and these guys are about to get picked off. Oh, that was... It was really brave, I'll at least give him that, but... Yeah, that was... It goes to show you how OP guns are, bro. Like, guns are a very OP weapon. Even earlier types, right?
Of the initial slaughter being hunted down by pursuing Ashigaru soon after.
Ooh.
Sin threw himself into a natural spring adorned in full armor, committing suicide by drowning.
Dang.
News of Sinrip's defeat at Cheongju caused panic in Seoul, and with no army to defend it, the Korean court decided to flee, despite the pleas of the populace. Kanishi's decisive victory angered his rival commander Kato even more. Some sources claim that Kanishi was initially against the war, and in a possible attempt to damage Hideyoshi's position, even warned the Korean court about the invasion, and was now moving quickly to erase any evidence of his betrayal.
Oh wow.
After almost coming to blows, the two daimyos took separate paths to Seoul. Kanishi's route was easier, looping north and west where the Han River was not a decisive obstacle. At the same time, Kato took a shorter route directly north, but where the river was at its widest. After performing this river crossing with considerable ingenuity, Kato was shocked upon seeing the banners of his rival flying over the city's...
Dude, Kato keeps taking L's. He just keeps losing. Dang it, always one step ahead of me, Kakarot. But you know. Oh, that's this guy. He just keeps losing. That's hilarious.
Battlements. He had been beaten again by mere hours. Koroda Nagamasa and his 3rd contingent, as well as Yukita Hideie's 10,000, arrived on June 16, 1592. The Korean capital itself was occupied with little bloodshed. Meanwhile, the Korean court had evacuated to Pyongyang. According to some sources, angered by their king's abandonment of them, the angry citizens burned many of the royal residences.
Oof.
Now that the capital had been taken, the Japanese armies set out to consolidate their gains. The countryside was pillaged largely without resistance. However, some Korean forces were still in the field. When the Japanese started raiding the area called Yangju, directly to the north of Seoul, the commander of a minor Korean unit decided to use their complacency against them. As the Japanese were pillaging Yangju, the Koreans appeared near the village. This drew the attention of the invaders, and a group of them moved against the Koreans, who upon contact dropped their weapons and started running towards the nearby mountains. They were chased by the Japanese, but it was a trap. As soon as the enemy entered the mountain pass, the Koreans hiding here surrounded and destroyed this unit.
Dang, that's some that reminds me of the Bulgarians' tactics of usually attacking from this. It's actually really smart though. Honestly, kind of a bit of trickery and guerrilla warfare. Probably the best approach when facing the Japanese, because again, I know the full capabilities of the Japanese forces on land. We see in Sengoku Jidai, they are no joke. I'm not fully aware of the complete prowess of the Korean land army at the time, but I feel confident in saying it's not as good as the Japanese. But so again, that very, very smart move there on their part.
Although the invaders lost only around 100 troops in this minor battle, it improved the morale of the Korean armies and forced the daimyos to be more careful in their raiding. After leaving Seoul, Kenichi and Kato, bitter rivals to the end, were split up again, their contingents marching to quell the northwestern Pyongan province and the far northeastern province of Hamgyong, respectively. Both were expected to reach the Chinese frontier at the Yalu and Tumen rivers during their expeditions. Furthermore, an 11,000-strong 3rd contingent would seize Hwanghae province. On top of this, a 4th contingent of 14,000 men would march east to quell the eastern coastal lands of Gangwon, while a 5th division of 25,000 troops would subdue the west coast province of Chungcheong. 15,700 soldiers of a 6th division set out for the bypass Chola province, while 30,000 men of the 7th would hold the crucial beachhead province of Gyeongsang. Finally, Yukita Hideie's 10,000 would hold Seoul itself and the neighboring Gyeonggi province. Hideie himself was appointed by Hideyoshi as an interim supreme commander. Japanese consideration now turned to logistics and supply. However, when Kato moved his troops to the north, he found that the Koreans, under Kim Myong-won, had force-marched their way to block the Japanese on the opposite side of the Imjin River. Although the Japanese had 20,000 troops and outnumbered the Koreans almost...
Oh dang, the Koreans have artillery? Interesting. That could be a really big advantage depending on how they use it though, but that's an interesting... I was not aware that they had that at their disposal.
2-1, the latter were in a great position to defend. The rains had flooded the river, making the crossing even more difficult for Kato. Before the Japanese approached the area, Kim had already burned the nearby forests and moved all of the boats in the area to the north coast. He knew that reinforcements were on the way and was planning on waiting on them in his excellent defensive position. Unfortunately for him, he didn't have full control of his army, for half of it was commanded by the courtier Han Ang-in, who demanded an immediate confrontation with the Japanese. The Battle of the Imjin River started on July 6, 1592. On the first day, the armies exchanged arrow and cannon volleys, but as the distance between the...
Well, they both have artillery. Yeah, I was aware of the Japanese artillery. We saw it come up in the Sengoku Jedi series. So, like, I'm wondering how widespread artillery is in the world at this point, because I know this is a bit earlier, um, in a few centuries than when I think artillery really, really just became almost essential. Like, you could not fight battles without it. Okay, never mind. It's gonna be like, well, they have artillery. But then again, they still do have the defensive position across the river. That's still way more favorable to them.
Two was significant, neither side suffered much. On the second day, the Koreans received 3,000 cavalry reinforcements. For Kato, it was clear that he had to do something to make the enemy move, or otherwise his situation would become untenable. So he ordered 3/4 of his army to retreat. The experienced...
Is he about to try to pull off a feigned retreat? Like, okay, look, we're leaving, and then this dude's gonna be like, look, they're retreating, we should pursue them and crush them, and he's gonna be like, oh, fine, whatever, and then they're gonna go, and then they're gonna get, like, jumped and destroyed? Is that what's gonna happen? Dude, if I'm right on the money, I'm gonna pat myself on the back. But we'll see.
Kim knew this was a trap, having already seen this tactic fighting the Jurchen peoples in the north. But inexperienced General Sin Hul was sure that he was about to score a glorious victory and decided to attack. Han Ung-in supported him and even ordered the execution of one of the generals who opposed the attack. Kim couldn't let the army advance without him, and so had no choice but to join Sin Hul when the latter started crossing the river.
Oh my gosh.
Soon the entire Korean army was on the south side of the Imjin River. Showing no signs of resistance, the 5,000 Japanese started fleeing, which only encouraged Sin Hul. Both armies entered a mountainous area to the south, and immediately after the Koreans were deep enough, Kato gave the order. Muskets sent volley after volley into the pursuers. The battle was over.
Dang, I knew it. Pat on the back, Edwin. Yeah, maybe it's because I'm finally getting used to, after watching so many of these war videos, I'm finally, like, picking up. But, like, yeah. Oh, man. Never give up the defensive position, guys. Like, you never do. Oh, man. What a waste. Could have been a major L for them, but they, like, threw it away. It's literally a reversal of what the Koreans did last video against the Japanese with their skirmish. So, like, the Japanese basically Uno reverse card them there.
But in a matter of minutes, the Japanese lost almost no troops, while more than 10,000 Koreans were dead, with only a portion of the cavalry managing to flee back across the river.
Dang.
Kato was now free to move north. But logistics was still a huge problem for the invading army. With its task of ferrying 8 armies now complete, the 700-ship-strong Japanese fleet began probing west from Busan, along the treacherous Korean south coast. They were moving directly towards Cholla, where Yi Sun-shin held command. The Korean navy as a whole was in a dire state, as most of the vessels of Gyeongsang were burned or scuttled. The commander of the remaining ships, Won-gyun, went into hiding among the many coves and inlets along Korea's southern coast, and sent a letter to Admiral Yi asking for help. But before he acted, Yi started gathering intelligence on Japanese naval movements. Moreover, he hoped to organize a united fleet of 90 ships with other admirals in the area. Some of Yi's men were executed, and their heads were displayed to the others in order to improve defeatist moods. However, on June 12th, the day Seoul fell to Japanese ground forces, Yi was forced to sail. King Seonjo's court issued orders for him to unite his vessels with those of Won-gyun. On June 13th, Yi Sun-shin led his fleet out of Yeosu Harbor. It was made up of 30...
Dude, I'm so hyped to finally see Yi back in action. It's been like over a year since I've seen, but like I'm happy to like to see the man in action. He really was like probably maybe even the best admiral of all history. I mean, you could honestly say that, and you know, obviously you can argue with all the admirals in his history, but I wouldn't hold it against anyone if they said Admiral Yi was the best. I'd be like, you know, part of me kind of agrees.
29 fighting vessels, 24 large panoxons, 15 small
Panaxon was the oar and sail propelled ship that was the main class of warship used by during the late 16th century. The first ship of this class was constructed in 1555. Interesting.
smaller-decked Hyupsun fighting ships, and 46 lighter scout ships, known as Seers. After rendezvousing with one at Dangpo, Yi slowly sailed to the east. As his makeshift navy rounded the edge of Koje Island and began working its way north, a scout ship approached them with a message that a fleet of Japanese ships was at anchor in Okpo port. This village was situated inside a large bay, not too far up the coast of Koje Island, and so it was there that the first naval battle of the war would be fought. As Korean naval forces entered the bay, Yi ordered his smaller ships to the flanks, while the heavier warships, including Yi's flagship, formed a line in the center. He sent a message to each of his captains, warning them not to give way, but to stand like mountain castles. Then he ordered an advance. More than 50 enemy transports were at anchor in front of Okpo village. Most were unmanned, ransacking the village in search of loot and setting fire to houses. Only when Korean ships neared them were they seen by the Japanese, due to the fact that smoke from the burning village obscured their vision.
Dang.
The Japanese hastily rushed back to their ships, attempting to lift anchor and then hugging the coast rather than heading for the open sea. Yi's fleet attacked, engaging the Japanese at a distance and encircling them before opening fire with cannons and fire arrows to the beat of their admiral's war drum.
Dang.
Though Japanese arquebusiers attempted to fire back, the distance meant that Yi's enemies could not attempt boarding actions, and they were
Yeah, that was a great move on Admiral Yi. If I remember it correctly from the Extra History series, is that he would utilize obviously superior range, because the Japanese, as we know, were formidable in close-up combat, land, boarding. I think it was a big part of their naval fighting. They would just board. So Admiral Yi just took that away from them and would just attack from a distance, keep distance, and just crush them. I'm so happy to see Admiral Yi back in action. It's like seeing an old friend.
gradually destroyed one ship at a time. When this fleet had broken, its crewmen dead or fleeing back to shore, 5 more ships were spotted in the evening near Happo, 4 of which were also destroyed by Yi. 26 ships of the Japanese Navy were destroyed on the first day, without a single loss for Yi Sun-shin's armada.
His record is just... He's just great.
The next morning, 13 additional Japanese ships were spotted near Jinhai. Yi once again destroyed 11 out of that number without suffering any losses. During these victories, Admiral Yi was often amused by the exotic trophies taken from enemy ships, particularly their elaborately ornate helmets, which were sent to the king Seonjo alongside news of the victory.
If you can die,
The harrowing experience of civilians Yi encountered after Okpo further enraged him, providing proof to him of Japan's savagery. The admiral then retreated back to Yosu in order to reorganize his forces. These naval defeats made the Japanese realize that the Korean Navy was not yet defeated, and they sent a force of ships to deal with Yi in early July. Being notified of this expedition to destroy him, the admiral sailed east on July 8th with only 23 warships. He had discarded the smaller Sea-Ear scout ships and replaced them with something altogether more formidable and far more famous, the Kabukson, otherwise known as the Turtle Ship.
Oh, yeah. Yes, the turtle ship, bro. One of the coolest. Look, when it comes to warfare, I'm not gonna lie, I'm not like the biggest fan of like air or like naval, the aspect of it. Like most of the war we cover in this channel, as you might have noticed, is mainly in land. Like I think that's the part of war I find the most fascinating. Like I often neglect air combat, and I often neglect naval combat. Even when I'm playing like Total War Rome 2, I'm like all about the land battles, but when it comes to like naval things, I kind of ignore the navy. I hardly ever build navies. And if I get in a naval conflict, I'll usually just auto resolve it because I'm not interested in it. But I will say though, one of the few times where I actually was interested is in the Admiral Yi series and just his spectacular track record. Admiral Yi made me, someone who's not all that interested in naval warfare, actually kind of geek out over it because, and this is my favorite type of ship ever. Like we've seen ships, you know, like the Romans and the Greek fire ships and, you know, the Napoleonic era ships manned by Nelson. But this is my favorite type of ship, the turtle ship. Admiral Yi's just brilliance. No boarding, just guns all around. This thing can fight on all fronts. Just defense and offense perfectly mended together to create the ultimate Japanese naval ship slayer. He's too good. He's too good, guys. He's too good. I love Admiral Yi. This entire series is gonna be me glazing Admiral Yi. This entire series is gonna be me geeking out over this guy.
The turtle ship was 28 meters long, 9 meters wide, and 6 meters high, making it a fairly large ship for the time. It sat low in the water, which allowed it to come in under the massive Japanese castle ships and blast their hulls with cannon fire and archery. A sloping roof of planks, bristling with iron spikes, was also laid on top of the hull, encasing the vessel like the shell of a turtle, hence the name. Around 15 of the advanced Korean cannons were mounted on each of these ships, along with a platform of archers. With his ships ready for battle, Admiral Yi sailed for Secheon, where around 50 Japanese ships were anchored, including 12 warships. The Japanese troops were fortified on the cliffs above the bay, where the Japanese commander, Wakazaka Yasaharu, made his command post. Although Yi realized that he could not risk closing with an enemy which possessed such fire support from the land, he also knew the Japanese capacity for arrogance, so he sent a small force into the bay as bait, and then had it turn and retreat as though fleeing in terror. Seeing this apparent display of weakness, Yasaharu's men ran down from the heights and embarked on their ships, pursuing Yi's.
It's so hilarious. That's what all it took to get them to move. Like, they had this amazing defensive, like, position, and they were like, yeah, let's get rid of it now. Because of this perceived weakness. Like, my goodness. Like, literally, like, suckers right there.
Navy into the middle of the bay. Witnessing the success of his lure, the Korean admiral ordered an assault, with the invincible turtle ships leading the advance. They crashed into the middle of the enemy formation and unleashed a storm of cannon fire and arrows in all directions, causing massive losses among the Japanese vessels. The nimbler Korean vessels were also able to avoid Japanese boarding actions. As his forces neared victory and the enemy ships sank one at a time, Yi was hit by a stray arquebus bullet in the shoulder, but remained stoic. After the enemy fleet had been destroyed, Yi supposedly drew a knife and dug the bullet out with it. When the battle was over, every ship which had pursued him lay burning on the sea or sunk.
This is your brain.
That is so awesome. That's Yi, bro. Like, the dude is built different. He gets shot in the shoulder, just rip that puny bullet out, bro. Doesn't even flinch, doesn't even cry, just takes it. Like, holy crap, he's on another level. He's just that great.
Victories kept on coming in the days after Secheon. Firstly, at Dangpo, Admiral Yi defeated a 21-ship-strong Japanese fleet, once again using his turtle ships to break apart and wreak havoc within the enemy formation. Soon after, the Koreans advanced on a 26-strong anchored enemy armada at Danghang-po. All but one of the Japanese vessels were destroyed after Yi lured them into the open and smashed their battle line to pieces. The land war was still not going well. but Yi made sure the position of his realm was supreme on the sea. Back in Japan, Hideyoshi was livid at the continued resistance of this small Korean fleet, and angrily ordered his admirals, Wakazaki Yasaharu, Kato Yoshiaki, and Kuki Yoshitaka, to cease their useless inland plundering and annihilate Yi Sunshin. The advancing armies needed supplies and reinforcements, but the Korean navy was stopping them. At the time, Yasaharu's 82-vessel fleet was the only one ready for the upcoming fight, and the proud daimyo chose to act alone. He would gain the glory from crushing Yi. The following morning, August 15th, Admiral Yi deployed his fleet in a bay near the island.
And that was a really bad idea too. Again, like you do see the Japanese desire for glory and just, their hunger for glory and battle, that it kind of makes them rush to do really stupid things. And Admiral Yi, recognizes that and is kind of lets them destroy themselves, It's that arrogance, right, that just keeps biting the Japanese in the butt.
Of Hansando. Admiral Wan wanted to just attack Yasaharu's fleet, but Yi refused. Rather than meeting Yasaharu's fleet in the narrows of Kyonne-rang, where Yi's ships might collide with one another, he sent 6 Panoksun warships forward as bait for a trap. When these ships emerged into visual range of the enemy, they switched direction and fled. Predictably, the victory-hungry Japanese fleet came barreling in pursuit.
They keep falling for the exact same trick. That's the funniest thing. They don't learn.
As they emerged into the open sea, the Korean fleet spread into a semicircular crane's wing formation, light vessels on the flanks, while the heavier ships formed a sturdy center. When everything was in place, Yi ordered a charge. Immediately, the more nimble wings enveloped all of Yasaharu's vessels, darting in and out whilst showering the enemy with cannon fire and archery. At the same time, the heavier center, fronted by 3 turtle ships, smashed directly into the enemy formation. Shooting from all sides, the monstrous turtle ships tore many Japanese ships apart with cannon, while the heavy Panoksun warships stayed at a distance, using their advantage in artillery to tear into the Japanese. In particular, metal case firebombs were shot from mortars located on the decks of the Panoksun craft. Only when the opposing ships were crippled did the admiral give the order to board and finish them off in melee. After many hours of this drubbing, Yasaharu realized he was defeated and fled to a fast ship, barely managing to escape. 2 of his relatives, Wakizaka Sabe and Watanabe Shichiemon, were not so lucky and were killed in the fighting. Of 82 Japanese vessels that had sailed through Kyonne-rang that day, only 14 survived the Battle of Hansando. The 2
My goodness, just complete domination. This man just can't stop winning.
colleagues of Yasaharu, whom he had left behind before the battle, Yoshitaka and Yoshiaki, were quickly informed of the disaster. They set sail immediately and reached Anglepo, where they ran into the battered remnants of Yasaharu's forces. 1 day later, on the 16th of August 1592, favourable winds prompted Yi to follow his defeated foe, arriving outside the Anglepo harbour and deploying his navy in the Crane's Wing formation once again. This time he faced a total of 42 Japanese warships at anchor, protected by their own armaments, land fortifications on the nearby coast, and shallow waters in the bay itself. Yi first attempted to lure the Japanese out with bait, as he had many times before, but the Hansando experience wizened his enemy to that tactic, and it garnered no response. Instead, the Korean admiral changed tactics, arranging for a continuous relay of ship squadrons to row into cannon range, unleash their destructive artillery volleys on the Japanese, and then withdraw to safety. This rolling bombardment was devastatingly successful.
That's I do, like I said, while I've had no personal that much interest in the naval aspects of war, it is still really cool to see. Again, he's one of the few people who make me actually interested in naval warfare. I'm like, ooh, really? And this is just beautiful, genius on his part. That's so cool. Just one circle. I do really appreciate it, because when I was playing War Rome, Total War Rome 2. Like, I just maybe it's just the way naval battles are there, but ships are so slow. And I'm just like, it's really it's not fun to play. Like, I don't personally have fun with it. So seeing him be able to like move his ships and like pull off these formations and move almost like with this type of like swift grace. I mean, granted, I think in real life it probably wasn't super like, I mean, much quicker than his enemies for sure, but you know what I mean. Just it impresses me. Like, it makes me really you know, admire his skill.
Almost all of the pirates, as Yi called them, were killed, especially on the larger craft, which had been the primary targets.
Dang.
Seeing that a few ships had been left undamaged, Yi now called his vessels off. Many Japanese had escaped to the nearby shore, and would probably wreak a terrible vengeance on Korean civilians if their means of escape was destroyed. Aiming to avoid unnecessary suffering among his people, the Joseon fleet withdrew to open water for the night. When they returned at dawn the following day, all Japanese survivors had fled, and the local inhabitants were unharmed. Yi still had
Genius. Even dude was thinking like ahead. He was like, he's so heroic. Even that, just like, now let me do this to rescue my people. Like, he's so heroic, so patriotic, such a genius, such an innovator. He is the moment, you know? I'm the ultimate Admiral Yi stan. Well, not the ultimate, but I am a fan of him. And this series is gonna be me glazing him. I'm sorry, Hideyoshi. You're cool and all. I like you too, but like, my boy Yi, I place him above you, way above you.
had not lost a single vessel in combat. At this point, Yi began to receive troubling reports that Ashigaru land armies were advancing into Cholla, and consequently withdrew to his base at Yosu. Though some Japanese prisoners had escaped the Admiral's wrath, it was only a minor speck on what had otherwise been a great naval campaign.
Certainly.
Yi's success was impressive. He was beginning to strangle the life out of Japan's invasion, but his rise to become the national hero of Korea was only just beginning. While Yi Sun-shin was making a name for himself in the seas of the south, in the north of the country, the Japanese general Kato Kiyomasa sought to gain more glory as well. In early September, and after capturing and sending 2 Korean princes down to Gyeongseong with an armed escort of 1,000 men, Kato prepared for a short incursion into Manchuria, where Jurchen tribes lived. The Japanese called these people Orangai, from the Korean word Oranke, which means barbarian. This symbolic expedition against the barbarians across the Tumen River served a more practical purpose as well. Kiyomasa would be able to test his army against a possible future foe and collect invaluable information as to how the semi-nomadic Jurchens fought. To aid him in this new military endeavor, he recruited Koreans from the Hamgyong province to act as his guides and vanguard. The locals had no love for the northern barbarians,
Oh, okay, never mind.
as the latter frequently raided their villages, so they were more than eager to offer their services to the Japanese.
Okay, so I was about to comment, like, are you sure you want them to guide you? But like, okay, it's like, well, we hate them more than you at the moment, so sure, why not? Wow, looking at the map, the Japanese made quite a lot of headway, eh?
And a sizable force of 3,000 Korean allies was assembled, ready to serve Kiyomasa. With his army now totaling around 11,000 men, Kato Kiyomasa became the first Japanese general to cross into China. Unbeknownst to him, he would also be the only one to do so at that time.
Oh wow.
They soon came upon an Orangai castle, and at dawn, the Japanese drew up their ranks and prepared for an assault. However, they soon became aware that even though the castle seemed formidable, it was lightly defended. As such, the Koreans advanced on the front of the fort, while the Japanese troops went around the mountain to the rear of the fortress, and working in groups of 50 or 30, they managed to pull out the stones using crowbars, and the wall collapsed. The Japanese entered the castle, and after some fierce arquebus volleys, they killed the small garrison and captured the Jurchen fortress. Despite this success, Kiyomasa, perhaps knowing that a Jurchen counterattack was incoming, decided to pull back towards the Korean border and made camp for the night on a hill. The following morning, the Koreans headed back across the Tumen, leaving the Japanese to face an army of around 10,000 angry Jurchens. Although Kiyomasa's chronicler informs us that for every Japanese dead, the Jurchens suffered 30 casualties, the attackers refused to give up and continued their ferocious assault. So fierce was the fight that at one point Kiyomasa's standard bearer was killed next to him, and the Japanese general had to hold it with his own hands. He also gave orders that the heads of the enemies were not to be collected as trophies, but only counted, for every samurai was needed for the fight. Even after 8,000 heads were tallied, the Jurchens continued to fight.
My goodness, holy crap, they seem like they want to fight till the end. Yeah, I don't know anything about the Jurchens. I mean, obviously I've heard of them, but like I don't really know exactly their structure or how many like men they can field and you know, exactly what their fighting is. Like I'm aware of the Japanese and how formidable they are in land, but it does seem like they do have the upper hand in melee. It just seems like the Jurchens have that kind of like self-destructive Roman mindset where they just keep throwing everything until they're all dead. So they at least have that going for them, but
Their attack finally came to a stop when an exceptionally heavy rain started falling in a way that it blew directly into their faces, and so they withdrew. Well satisfied with his troops' performance and the results of this short campaign, Kato Kiyomasa crossed in turn the Tumen River and continued eastwards towards the sea, capturing a series of Korean forts along the way. Kato Kiyomasa's scouting expedition to Manchuria was the closest the Japanese reached to invading China, their true objective. But to amass a force large enough to invade the Middle Kingdom, they needed to dominate the sea around Korea. However, Admiral Yi inflicted defeat upon defeat on the Japanese navy, and 1 month after Kiyomasa's incursion over the Tumen River, he would strike again, putting an end to Japanese ambitions of invading China. Following the extraordinary success of the Hansando Angelpo campaign, Admiral Yi had returned to his base at Yosu in Chola province. There his fleet was reinforced with ships that had been hastily put into production upon the outbreak of the war. With 166 vessels under his command, 74 being large battleships, Yi Sun-shin fathomed a plan to wash away the national disgrace and directly attack Busan. Joined by fellow commanders Yeoki and Won-kyun, he reached the estuary of the Naktong River on the 4th of October and sent a scouting raft that came back reporting that 500 Japanese ships were anchored inside the city's harbour. The size of the Japanese fleet didn't seem to deter the Korean admiral, who, emboldened by his previous victories, decided to attack the following day. Facing a strong east wind and fighting against the rough seas, the Korean fleet made its way towards Busan. In the waters just off the harbour, they encountered 24 Japanese ships, organized in small groups.
You know, I always kind of thought about this when it came to, like, ships in the past. Like, nowadays we have, like, you know, much better technology to help us get around areas, like, with, like, you know, like, motors and whatnot. Like, back then, a lot of ships were really just reliant on, at least more reliant on, you know, like, wind and like stuff like that. So like it is interesting because I feel like in some ways, I mean, I know like naval and ground warfare are, you know, both difficult. I don't mean to sound like I'm trying to undermine one or the other, but I was thinking about like naval warfare just sounds like a bit more complex in my head. Maybe it's just because I haven't looked too much deep into it, but yeah, like predicting the conditions of the weather and, you know, of the waters you're going into and the wind and all that, just, yeah, I could never do it. Then again, I'm really scared of the sea, guys. I've only been on, like, a ship, like a big ship once in my life, and I was not built for it. I was only on it for an hour, and I was like this the entire time. I was like, it was when I went to Greece, and I'm just like, you know what? I'll take flying. I hate flying too, but I was like, I'll just take the flying, rather than the seafaring, you know. So, yeah. But a lot of respect for people who are built for the sea, like, I don't know, just to me it's scary.
These ships were easily burned and destroyed, and the Koreans entered the harbour itself, witnessing the Japanese armada that was split into 3 large masses anchored near the shore. The Japanese crews, realizing that there was no time to set sail and fight the enemy at sea, jumped overboard and headed for fortifications on the heights above the shore, from where they would mount their defense. Just like Sacheon, the Koreans approached as closely as they could and bombarded the unmanned Japanese ships with their cannons, while also showering them with fire arrows. The Japanese, well protected behind their fortifications, tried to prevent the destruction of their fleet by unleashing barrages of musket fire and arrows, and making use of Korean cannons that had been captured in Busan and Dongnae, whereas others were frantically trying to repair their damaged ships. However, only the coming of night could stop the Koreans, who withdrew to the open sea after destroying 130 Japanese vessels. On the other hand, only 5 Koreans died during the battle, and 25 were wounded.
Dude. Oh, I'm still just keep getting amazed by just the casualties. Like, hasn't lost a single ship. At best, he probably, like, loses less than a dozen men. It's just... his skill is unmatched, bro. It's like watching, like, a pro Total War player against noobs. It's just, like... it's just that the skill gap is insane, you get me? Like, it's so... I've never seen a skill gap this wide, you get me? In any series. That's right, Admiral Yi definitely left a very big impression upon my mind after we watched a, extra history video about him.
This time as well, Admiral Yi lost no ships. Emboldened by his triumphant victory, he initially wanted to return to Busan the following morning and inflict further damage upon the Japanese, but reconsidered his choice as the sinking of the entire fleet would leave the invaders trapped in Korea with no avenue of retreat.
Yeah, they need to get them off of Korean land. So I guess the mindset is, okay, inflict so much damage to basically scare them to where they realize that they can't have naval superiority, and upon that realization, right, they would probably be like, okay, we're gonna be stranded here, we're not gonna get any, like, reinforcements or supplies, so we need to get out while we still can, which would trigger that kind of panic and let them get out while they can. I guess that's like what Admiral Yi is banking on. And again, naval superiority is OP, guys. Like, Admiral Yi proves it, once again, like, just... again, very smart of him, because, like, he takes these things into consideration. He could achieve even greater annihilation against his foes, but he always leaves that little window for them to escape. Not because of his, like, not because out of, like, mercy, but because of a more practical sense of realizing, okay, we can't have these people lingering around on the Korean mainland and just going around, being like bandits, in a sense.
Something Sun Tzu in his Art of War advises against.
Oh, really?
The defeat at Busan and the loss of around a quarter of their fleet extinguished any lingering hopes the Japanese might have of amassing an army in the north large enough to invade China. The victories Admiral Yi Sun-shin had won at sea had prevented the entry of his Japanese foes into the Yellow Sea, rendering them unable to reinforce and resupply their armies on land. Meanwhile, Korean ground forces behind the Japanese lines were doing the same. In the countryside and wilderness, guerrilla armies began to form almost immediately, reacting to the cruelty they and their countrymen experienced at the hands of the enemy. Resistance leaders such as Ko Kyung-myung, Cho Hon, and Kwak Chae-yu set up ambushes to trap enemy troops and preyed on vulnerable Japanese supply barges that were using Korea's rivers for transport. These actions further hampered the
very smart. Like I said, I think I may have said it in the first part of this series, you gotta focus on, like, the Japanese and their, like, ground forces are really great, as we witness in the Sengoku Jidai series. So taking the guerrilla approach, probably the smartest thing you can do, especially since Admiral Yi has kind of been preventing more of them coming. Like, this is just the smartest approach I think you can have.
Logistics of Toyotomi Hideyoshi's conquering army in much the same way Admiral Yi was doing at sea. Motivated partly by patriotism and partly by a desire to raise the social status of their kin, an estimated 22,000 irregular fighters and 84,500 regular soldiers from the Yalu River in the north to the Naktong Delta in the south rejoined the fight as guerrilla warriors in 1592, among them 8,000 Buddhist monks.
Wow.
In November of 1592, Korean guerrilla forces contributed to the successful defense of Jinju, a battle which caused many Japanese casualties and humiliated the daimyo generals. Most crucially, all of the chaos behind Hideyoshi's lines was giving Korea time, and time was exactly what Korea needed. The bastion which guarded Chola province, Castle Jinju, had a reputation of being unassailable. Still untouched by the war, Chola represented the potential of loot for the invading Japanese troops. It also served as the hideout for Gwak Jeyu's Righteous Army, one of the partisan groups assailing Japanese supply lines. Thus, Ukita Hideiie and Hosokawa Tadaoki agreed that they had to capture Jinju, and so they dispatched a 20,000-man strong army under the leadership of Kato Mitsuyasu, Hasegawa Hidekazu, Nagaoka Tadaoki, and Kimura Shigeji, which after reconquering Changwon, arrived outside the walls of Jinju on November 8th. Guarding the fortress was a 3,800-strong Korean garrison, led by Kim Shi-min, who was determined to hold the fortified city. Despite being direly outnumbered, the Koreans had one advantage: their artillery, for they were well equipped with cannons, mortars, and bombs, as well as 170 new arquebuses that were equal to those the Japanese used.
Dang.
The Japanese army advanced from three sides, and once the Ashigaru gunners were in firing range, they unleashed a volley in an attempt to scare the garrison into surrendering the castle without a fight. This ploy had paid off in the past, but it wouldn't work this time around. As the Japanese came closer to the walls, the defenders unleashed hell, as arquebus fire, bombs, and heavy stones fell on the attackers, who weren't expecting such stiff resistance. After falling back for a while, the Japanese resumed their offensive, this time under the cover of shields made of bamboo, and massed volleys from their arquebusiers. When the besiegers reached the walls, they placed scaling ladders, but the defenders, ignoring the bullets, used axes and stones to smash the ladders. Japanese laborers also constructed a siege tower, and from its advantageous height, the Ashigaru fired over the walls and into the city. For 3 days, wave upon wave of Japanese attackers crashed on the walls of Jinju, only to be pushed back by a hail of projectiles from the defenders, who even threw flaming bundles of straw filled with gunpowder down upon their foes.
That's creative.
Finally, on the night of the 11th, groups belonging to the Righteous Army sent by Gwak Jeyou arrived to aid in the defense of the castle. Because they were too few to be an effective relief force, they went up on a nearby hill, where they lit many torches.
Oh, we've seen this trick before. This is one of the most famous examples of us witnessing this is definitely in the Belisarius series by Epic History, where he actually utilized this trick a few times. And essentially, it's supposed to give the psychological effect of your enemies, like, there's more of us than there are of you. It's like one of those bluffs. And so far, I can't think of a time when this has appeared that the enemy never fell for it. So, it might work again. It has a pretty good track record on this channel. I mean, I'm sure there are times maybe it didn't work, but so far I haven't encountered one in a series yet. This could be the first, but either way, I always like this trick. I always like seeing it and it working.
So as to trick the Japanese into thinking that a large force had flanked them. The guerrillas were soon joined by 3,000 more men, forcing the Japanese to divert a portion of their troops to guard against an attack from them. Despite that, the besiegers remained focused on their objective, but were still unable to overcome the staunch Korean defense. On the final day, the Japanese decided that if brute force wasn't enough, then maybe a clever stratagem could work. In the early morning hours of November the 13th, They illuminated their camp with more torches than usual so as to be visible by the Koreans, and pretended to pack up their gear and prepare to leave.
Oh.
At the time of a given signal, the torches were extinguished, and an all-out assault on the opposite side of the city, along the northern and eastern gates, was launched. The Koreans rushed to defend, with Kim Shi-min in the van, fighting beside his men, only to have a bullet mortally wound him in the left of his forehead.
Holy crap. Okay, yeah, very smart. At least now, very interesting move now. I think it's smart that they didn't just keep going with the same old tried tactic of just straight up assault that obviously weren't going nowhere. So I do have to commend the Japanese for trying something new and seemingly getting the Koreans a bit off guard there.
This was kept from his men so they would not lose heart. The Korean garrison was...
This is very smart of the Japanese, I mean, the Koreans. Like, as we know, Yi dies in the same way, but he's like, alright, don't tell anyone I'm dying, you know, before the battle's over, or else morale will basically be destroyed. So it's very smart of them to just be like, okay, just don't tell anybody I'm dead, because as we've seen so many times in so many freaking videos, the moment people find out like a commander or leader is dead, all morale just instantly shatters and everyone gives up. So very smart to just keep stuff like that under wraps if you can.
Already in a perilous situation, as ammunition was running low, but they were saved when a Korean detachment arrived by boat up the Nam River, bringing with them supplies and encouraging the defenders to continue. With casualties once more piling high, the Japanese commanders halted the attack. Fearing a counterattack from the rear, they decided, much to Hideyoshi's fury, to abandon the siege altogether and head back to Changwon under the cover of a sudden downpour.
It's so weird to see Hideyoshi through this perspective, like, kind of in, like, when we covered the Sengoku Jidai series, he's basically the main character of that series, and you know, it's always constantly around him, and then you see just how much of a genius he is on the battlefield, but here, he's not directly leading, he's, you know, in Japan, obviously, the base, and, but, like, he kind of comes across like a Saturday morning cartoon villain, kind of like Mr. Claw from, like, Inspector Gadget, like, I'll get you next time, Gadget, or something like that. Like, just all his plans keep getting foiled, and he's just over there, like, fuming, and, you know, I don't know, it's an interesting perspective. It's interesting just how perspective really changes. Like, we're here following the Koreans, and then Hideyoshi's just some outside villain who's, you know, constantly being foiled, and in the Japan series, he's like the main character and just unstoppable. It is really cool to see familiar characters in different perspectives, you know? I always do like that. I imagine we were following more the Japanese perspective, though, like, frickin' Yi would probably be like a horror movie villain. He just pops up out of nowhere and keeps killing everybody.
The Korean army, exhausted and low on supplies and ammunition, didn't attempt to pursue the retreating Japanese. The situation was about to become a lot worse for the Japanese, when in late 1592, Ming China, which had long been a suzerain and protector of Korea, finally began its intervention in the war. Initially, a Chinese expeditionary force of 3,000 troops, under the command of the reckless Zhu Chengxun, was ordered to take Pyongyang, but was destroyed when it became trapped and outnumbered inside the city.
Dang.
While this victory made the Japanese optimistic at first, the samurai commanders soon realized that the Chinese would be back soon and in massive numbers.
Certainly.
Worried about this,
If there's one thing I know about the Chinese, is that their manpower makes Rome look like a puny ant. Because, holy crap, the Japanese manpower is not Japanese, Chinese. Can I say Japanese? Chinese? Yeah, I'm sorry. But, Chinese manpower just makes everyone else, except maybe Russia, just looks like puny ants, so they always come back in greater numbers.
the vulnerable state of Pyongyang, Kenichi Yukinaga went south to Seoul in order to meet with his supreme commander Ukita Hideie, so that they might discuss these urgent matters. It turns out that Japanese anxieties were justified, for in January of 1593, after crushing the Ningxia revolt back home, the Chinese commander Li Rusong slowly led a large army of Ming troops into Korea, wisely using scouts and spies to gather intelligence on Japanese positions as he advanced.
Smart.
After some minor skirmishes, Li Rusong's forces approached Pyongyang on February 5th. An initial Japanese sortie from the gates was crushed by a feigned retreat, but it was clear that recapturing the city would present a massive challenge. Pyongyang enjoyed a strong defensive position, flanked to the east by the Taedong River and northwest by the Patong River. Moreover, it possessed some of Korea's most formidable walls, which had been continuously reinforced throughout the centuries, forming a crude, elongated triangle lying between the two rivers, within which were 6 gates. Meanwhile, the entrances along the Taedong River were lightly defended, with each of the 4 landward gates garrisoned by 2,000 Japanese soldiers apiece. Moreover, Kenichi Yukinaga and 2,000 elite bodyguard troops were deployed on Mount Moranbong, a 70-meter-high fortified vista from which a commanding view of the surroundings could be had. Overall, roughly 15,000 men of the 1st Contingent defended Pyongyang. By the time he arrived at Pyongyang, Li Rusong's 43,000-strong imperial army had been further swollen by many thousands of Koreans and 5,000 warrior monks. He set up his own headquarters on high ground west of the Patong River, personally commanding 9,000 troops. Around the city, the general distributed various detachments under his subordinates to assault the various gates. 10,000 soldiers under Zhang Shijie were set up opposite the Chilsong Gate. 11,000 under Yang Yuan formed up facing the Patong Gate, and a further 10,000 under Li Rubo prepared to assault the Hanggu Gate. Finally, 9,000 Koreans under their native commanders Yi Il and Kim Il-so were ordered to the Changyong Gate. The Chinese cannons, capable of firing large stones over 2 kilometers, were distributed evenly around the siege lines under heavy guard.
Oh, okay, so far the positioning of the siege seems pretty good. Obviously the big problem is the walls, right? And just the formidable position of this, city, like with the lakes and whatnot, like naturally also enhanced by the strong walls. Yeah, taking this sounds like it's gonna be rough for sure, but I will say though, the Chinese seem very competent under this man's leadership. They have all the bases as much as they can covered, and they have artillery, so I don't know, they definitely, I think, have their own advantages, and I'm kind of like I'm wondering how this is gonna go.
After an attempt to assassinate Kenichi Yukinaga failed, the assault began. Spearheading the assault were 3,000 warrior monks, capable warriors under the command of Hu Zhong, a master monk. On the morning of February 6, 1593, these brave religious warriors advanced up the northern slope of Mount Moranbong, attempting to scale the hill walls. In the face of withering arquebus fire from the Japanese on the fortifications, they suffered hundreds of casualties, but persevered nonetheless. As the defenders began to tire in the late afternoon, the monks were joined by a Chinese unit under Wu Weizhong, whose troops began to scale Mount Moranbong from the west. This contingent began to breach the area, streaming onto the mountain behind Yukinaga's lines. All of a sudden, Yukinaga was surrounded, and there was a danger he would be killed.
Oh dang, they got into they're in. But then again, like, I imagine all these extra men are gonna probably come in and try to push them back out and fill in the gaps, right?
At that moment, So Yoshitomo, a compatriot of Yukinaga, led a counterattack from the main city and broke the Chinese encirclement on Mount Moranbong, allowing the remnants of Yukinaga's 2,000-strong guard to retreat. That evening, the Japanese abandoned the mountain, instead taking up positions in their recently constructed citadel, a construction of primitive earthworks.
Oh dang, but that's still a pretty good, strong opening for the team up of the Koreans and the Chinese. They have a portion of the city, at least the high ground mountain, they're in, so not a bad start overall, eh?
The next morning, Li Rusong ordered a general assault on Pyongyang with all forces engaged. As the first blast of cannon fire sounded, the general advanced at the head of his troops, only to be met with a storm of Japanese arquebus fire, rocks, arrows, and boiling water. Aiming to blunt this dogged resistance, Ming cannons continuously battered the walls and gates of Pyongyang, aiming to soften them up. At the same time, incendiary bombs and fire arrows were loosed into the city itself, causing chaos, setting fire to buildings and even the forest outside of the city. Under the hail of projectiles, Chinese and Joseon casualties mounted, forming mounds of corpses which their comrades climbed upon to advance. To further stiffen his men's resolve, Li Rusong publicly killed a deserting soldier and then offered 5,000 ounces of silver to any brave man who would breach the walls first.
Ooh, very smart. Love the incentive there. Dang. He's really good, like he's really competent. It's really interesting because again, I was mainly focused and expecting Yi, but it's cool to have some more knowledge about what the heck's going on in the land front of this war. I'm really appreciating it and just seeing that yeah, the Chinese seem to be really turning the tide, eh? So overall, yeah, this is really cool.
The unbearable pressure of artillery bombardment and the infantry assault, in addition to the employment of the famous cloud ladders of Chinese siege warfare, Pyongyang's defenses broke.
Dang.
The Chilsong Gate and the surrounding wall collapsed, allowing Ming troops and surviving warrior monks inside.
Oh my gosh.
Meanwhile, at the shattered Putong Gate, Luo Shangji, swinging his halberd, was one of the first to enter the city. Now, under intense pressure, the defensive ring along the walls of Pyongyang fell apart, resulting in a Japanese withdrawal to the inner citadel. This hastily constructed...
Dude, they basically have the city. Like, look at all... There's, like, very few remnants of the Japanese forces left. Wow.
fortification was apparently built with holes in its side for arquebusiers to fire through, which caused it to look like a beehive. The sophisticated Chinese officers, looking with scorn at the primitive and barbarian citadel, immediately
I love that. They're like, ugh, how primitive. We could have built something way better than that ugly thing. I like they're just more disgusted at its construction than anything.
immediately ordered an assault in mass ranks. This proved to be a dreadful mistake. Japanese troops fired volley after volley of arquebus shots into the tightly packed Ming and Korean soldiers, causing massive casualties and breaking the assault's momentum. When Yukinaga saw some enemies retreating from the city altogether, he led a sortie from the citadel in an attempt to break the siege, but was methodically driven back by concentrated...
That's what I was gonna say, like, get your artillery in there and just shoot down this citadel. Like, it seems hastily constructed, that's what they said, and mainly of earthworks. So if, like, you concentrate enough artillery on it, wouldn't that be effective in just tearing that thing down? I don't know, that's my thought, so I'm happy to see he did bring artillery there. That's what I was thinking, like, yeah, just bring in the artillery, just blast that thing to Kingdom Come, you know? But he was already ahead of me, because he's just that good.
Chinese cannon fire. As daylight waned, the Japanese were still in control of the inner fortress, but were badly bloodied. Li Rusong decided to pull his men back for the night so they could rest. Meanwhile, inside the citadel, Yukinaga held a war council. It was quickly decided their position was untenable, and the Japanese decided to retreat. Under the cover of darkness, the entire remaining garrison quietly withdrew through the Changyong Gate and across the frozen Taedong River.
Dang.
According to Samurai Yoshinojin Gozeemon, who was present during the retreat, wounded men were routinely abandoned, while those exhausted men simply crawled along the road. Yukinaga's men hoped to rest at a communication fort at Pungsan, but it had been abandoned by its commander, who assumed Yukinaga had already been annihilated.
Wow.
This Ming-dominated victory at Pyongyang was a change in momentum. While at the start of the war, the Japanese had seemed unstoppable, It was now Li Rusong's army that advanced, and the Japanese who were in a headlong retreat.
Yeah, Li Rusong is really cool though. Like the moment he showed up, like things have suddenly started to look incredibly different. You know, because the Japanese, who had kind of been dominant on land, for once seem to have kind of met their match in the Ming. And I'm not sure just how powerful the Ming are at this time, especially in compared to the Japanese, but they seem to have very competent leadership and very good siege craft ability. So I will say, though, that this does definitely feel like a turn of the tide, and it's cool to see a new character, because like I said, I'm only familiar with this through the Extra History Admiral Yi series, and that's mainly focused on just Admiral Yi. So all the other major players of this war kind of are not really named or given focus, so it's cool to see, you know, Commander Lee and his contribution to the war. That's really nice to see.
Nevertheless, the Japanese 6th contingent under Kobayakawa Takakage managed to lure Lee into a trap, defeating his army at the Battle of Byeokjiguan. This would prove to be one of the biggest pitched battles of the invasion, and one which the Chinese general only narrowly escaped before withdrawing his army north to recover.
Oh, dang.
Having heard of the Ming victories in the north and at Pyongyang, a gifted Korean general known as Guan Yu marched 2,300 troops to garrison the fortress of Hangzhou, located on a hill 13 kilometers north of Seoul. The delay caused by Li Rusong's tactical defeat gave the Japanese some breathing room, and allowed Ukita Hideie to march straight at Hangzhou with 30,000 soldiers, among whom included the reconstituted forces of Yukinaga, who had regrouped after fleeing Pyongyang. They would soon meet Guan Yu's army in the field, fully expecting to crush the tiny and bothersome force without any issue. However, the ensuing battle would not go the way the Japanese were expecting it to. At 6 AM on the 14th of March 1593, Ukita's army encircled Hangzhou and marched up the slopes leading up to it from all directions. Unbeknownst to the Japanese, however, the Koreans were waiting and ready for them. Dug in behind formidable entrenchments, Guan Yu's forces sent a barrage of bowfire, arquebus shots, delayed action mortar bombs, rocks, and even tree trunks down on the attackers. Most infamous were the Korean Hwacha, medieval rocket launchers capable of loading up to 100 steel-tipped rockets. Despite this rabidly fearsome—
That's a really cool piece of weaponry I've never heard of. That seems really cool.
defense, Japan's numerical superiority paid off, and the Koreans were forced back to the second defensive line. But their artillery caused devastating casualties upon the massed Japanese waves. 9 attacks were made in total, and all 9 attacks were repelled. Overall, some sources claim up to 10,000 attackers ended up dead or wounded. Outnumbered by more than 10 to 1, Guan Yu had gained victory.
Yeah, especially that moment where they all came close, right? I thought for a second there he might just lose, but the artillery really came into play and helping. That is really impressive, Guan Yu. Very impressive defense there.
This remarkable triumph prompted the Chinese commander Li Rusong to once again move south. Having been despondent after his prior defeat against the Japanese, his huge Ming army now advanced south once again. In Seoul, the situation was horrible for the Japanese soldiery. Frostbite, starvation, and disease had worn down the expeditionary army to around 53,000 total troops from its original 150,000, and it was clear that operations would need to cease for the time being. The remaining armies of Japan decided on a southward retreat to their coastal fortress at Busan, and as a result, the Chinese army—
Dang, dude, look at how much territory they've lost. The Japanese are being driven further and further away inland. From the inland. That's how do you say, like, yeah, the writing's on the wall, I think. I didn't even think they're starting to come to the realization, yeah, the writing's on the wall, bro.
liberated Seoul on May 19th. After this, logistical constraints and a cautious approach meant that the war ground down into a stalemate, with neither side making any decisive movements. Diplomacy also took place during this unenforced truce, and Li Rusong sent envoys to meet with the daimyo generals in Busan, discussing topics such as troop withdrawal from the provinces and assigning blame for the war. Nevertheless, this was not an indication that Japan was militarily spent, and the generals now began to prepare for a punitive destruction of Jinju. Hideyoshi's forces had failed to take the strongly fortified city in 1592, much to their humiliation and dishonor, and they would now avenge that loss. So, despite negotiating with the Ming Chinese at the same time, Hideyoshi sent the order to wipe Jinju off the map. Having heard of the Japanese plans, the Koreans had managed to assemble around 4,000 troops in the city, ready to defend it to the death. On the 20th of July 1593, Supreme Commander Ukita Hideiie arrived outside the city with an army 90,000 men strong,
Oh my gosh.
swollen by recent reinforcements from the homeland.
Dang, holy crap. I like how they're basically on the losing foot and they're like, man, we really need to take this place. The humiliation of their previous failure really driving them, but yeah, like I said, the writing's on the wall. They've been pushed back so hard. Yeah, you know what I mean? So,
To the western edge of the city, Kenichi Yukunaga commanded 26,000 men, while his rival Kato Kiyomasa led 25,000 to the north. On the eastern flank of Jinju was Ukita Hideiie himself, with 17,000 troops under his leadership. Behind these assault forces was a ring of Japanese troops facing outward, to guard against any possible Ming assault on their siege lines. Furthermore, the besieging army placed contingents on the hills near the city in order to repel any reinforcements that came to relieve Jinju. To the northwest, Kobayakawa Takakage, the victor of Byokjagwan, held authority over 8,700 troops, while Mori Hidemoto was stationed to the northeast with 13,000. Finally, Kakawa Hiroie had several thousand more across the Nam River to clean up any trouble to the city's south. Throughout July 21st, the Japanese labored to drain the newly built moat outside the city. In this, they found limited success, as outer sections of the dikes were destroyed and the channel was filled with rocks, earth, and brushwood. This set the stage for a general attack on the landward side of the city the next day. Using scaling ladders to storm the walls, Japanese troops fought fiercely and almost penetrated the city's defenses, but clever Korean use of artillery and fire arrows drove them back.
again, that artillery keeps coming back into play, and I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Artillery's OP, guys. Like, if you know how to use it, that's a major game changer, whether you're in defense or in attack mode. And the Koreans really do seem to know how to use it defensively, so I have to give them that.
As the 23rd dawned, large and static siege towers were constructed in order to facilitate observation and arquebus fire into the city. However, this was not successful, as destructive Korean cannon fire shot the towers to pieces one by one.
Dang.
Things seemed to be looking better for the defenders when a local army marched toward Jinju from the east in an attempt to relieve it. However, these reinforcements were quickly pushed away by Hidemoto's northeast rearguard. On July 25th, Hideiie sent a message into the castle, calling on Kim Chonil, the garrison commander, to surrender. The Supreme Commander received no reply. Japanese forces tried again on the 26th. This time, a series of tortoiseshell wagons with boarded roofs were constructed, providing protection for advancing troops, while sappers mined foundation stones from the ramparts. It made some progress, but this assault was pushed back when bundles of combustibles dropped off the walls were set alight, burning the protective shells.
Dang.
Nevertheless, it was becoming clear that the garrison was running out of things to throw at Hideie's army. Undaunted by the previous failure, Kato Kiyomasa ordered that new tortoise wagons were to be readied, and this time fireproofed, by covering them with oxhide. On the 27th, a new attack began, which focused on the cornerstones of the northeastern section of the wall. During the day, a heavy rainstorm broke out, which undermined the foundations, eventually collapsing this pressured section.
Dang.
Taking advantage of the breach, Japanese troops began to storm the city through the gap. Korean resistance collapsed almost immediately after this. Kim Chonil, observing events from a tower in the center of Jinju, decided to commit suicide rather than surrender to the enemy. This was the end of Jinju. Terrified civilians and soldiers alike attempted to flee a brutal ensuing massacre by jumping into the Nam River, but were cruelly cut down on the far bank by Kikawa's troops. When the chaos was over, Japanese records claim that 20,000 heads were taken in total, while Korean annals claim 60,000 died at Jinju, a testament to Japanese barbarism.
Holy crap. Oh man, I almost was hoping that they would pull off the win again, but man. Dang.
River flowed red with blood that night, and its banks were choked with headless corpses as far as the eye could see. Despite the totality and brutality of this Japanese victory, it did little to change the overall course of the war. Soon the Japanese were forced to retreat back to the chain of coastal fortresses they controlled in the south, known as Wajo. Negotiations began, a ceasefire was imposed, and a Ming emissary was sent to Japan to discuss terms with Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Gradually, the daimyo and their men started to return to their homeland. To the north, the Chinese also withdrew their expeditionary force home. Though peace talks would continue for years after this, and the first invasion of Korea was essentially over, the war was not done. King Seonjo arrived back in the Joseon capital of Seoul on October 24, 1593, after an exile of more than a year. Though the majority of his country had been reclaimed, it was completely drained of resources and its population in the grips of terrible famine. Royal treasuries sat empty, many productive settlements had been destroyed, and much economic devastation had been caused by the war. The rebuilding effort would be headed by newly appointed Prime Minister Ryu Song-rong, who prioritized national defense. All over the nation, and especially in the Japanese-occupied south, the Joseon government began to construct impregnable mountain fortresses, situated to take advantage of terrain. Furthermore, modernization reforms in the Joseon military were undertaken from late 1593 onwards. Unit organization was tuned and adjusted, and new weapons such as modern firearms and more—
Okay, this is all very smart. I'm glad he's taking this approach of defense after what they just went through. I think that's just smart on him.
Advanced battle tactics were adopted. Reconstruction throughout the following years gradually brought normalcy back to Korean life, but this also came with the dangers which had plagued King Seongjo's government before the war, as factional court politics now re-emerged. The labyrinthine rivalry between Westerner and Easterner factions reignited with greater intensity than before. The Prime Minister was a prominent member of the Easterner faction, but going after a man of his lofty status was too dangerous, so his enemies decided on a softer target. Admiral Yi Sun-shin was a childhood friend of Ryu Song-rong and had recently been promoted to commander of the Korean Navy in the south. In discrediting this decorated admiral, the Westerners had a mole, Yi's underling Won-gyun, who during the first Japanese invasion had cunningly intrigued against the victorious Yi, constantly sending unfavorable reports northward, grounded in nothing but lies. This factional infighting did not bode well, especially since, as they were happening, diplomatic failures between Japan and China had provoked Toyotomi Hideyoshi into preparing a second invasion. In comparison to the grand continental conquest envisioned in the prior assault, this second attack was to be a simple grab for Korea's southern half. One of the most important lessons learned by the daimyo was just how critical of a threat the Korean Navy was. So the Japanese commanders aimed to achieve supremacy at sea by two means: assembling a far stronger fleet than the one before, and weakening the enemy fleet by neutralizing its prodigious commander, Admiral Yi. To that end, Japanese forces began heavily reinforcing their armies in Korea. In addition to the roughly 20,000 remaining garrison troops in the coastal Wajo fortresses, 121,000 more soldiers were to be mobilized. Under the supreme authority of the 15-year-old Kobayakawa Hideaki, Japanese soldiers ever so slowly began returning to enemy soil in March of 1597. After they did, Hideyoshi's forces did not launch an instant assault, but instead stalled for months on end, waiting for harvest season. By plundering local farmers during this plentiful time of year, the Japanese forces could live off the land more easily, relatively unaided by vulnerable supply lines. Moreover, Hideyoshi's plan was to march through the southwest province of Chola, known as the breadbasket of Korea. Before the land invasion even began, events at sea were to prove utterly disastrous for the defenders as Japanese intrigue bore fruit. Kenichi Yukinaga sent a spy named Yujiro to inform the Korean High Command that he was eager to extinguish his rival, Kato Kiyomasa, for good. To this end, he provided a precise location as to where the lethal Korean Navy could easily ambush the hated commander at sea. The gullible Joseon court believed him and sent Yi Sun-shin the order to prepare the attack. Upon receiving this order, Admiral Yi was immediately suspicious, not trusting the Japanese given information.
Yeah, Admiral Yi actually has like a brain cell. And he has common sense. He's like, why would the Japanese be giving us information how to destroy each other? Like, come on, like they literally are like, you know, rearming. I have to say though, I will say Hideyoshi's new strategy of, okay, we need naval supremacy, you know, definitely his ambitions are tempered now. He's like, okay, we can't take all China, not after all that, but we can maybe take southern Korea. So again, you know, the lower part, so at least he's being more realistic, I think, this time around, and smart in trying to get rid of Yi, and, you know, I'll say definitely more devious, but smart in his approach. But man, like I said, I get annoyed because I hate the way Admiral Yi got done dirty multiple times in his life, and when he kept getting demoted and removed, like, yeah. Yeah, this is gonna frustrate me.
And thinking that this sounded far too easy, the Admiral refused to obey. In response, officials were dispatched to depose and arrest the heroic naval commander, replacing him with none other than the wily intriguer himself, Won Gyun, who immediately began proving himself totally incompetent. Yi avoided execution by the skin of his teeth, but was demoted to the status of a common soldier. This Japanese ploy had worked wonders, and it seemed the dangerous Admiral Yi was neutralized forever.
Again, you have to give it to the Japanese, they were smart. They were cunning in that, like, get rid of the biggest enemy so far. But man... Poor Yi, bro. He did not deserve any of this.
Soon after this, Yujiro once again informed the Joseon court of a location they could easily ambush another Japanese fleet. This time, however, Admiral Yi was not present to advise caution. On the 17th of August, Admiral Won Kyun, heavily pressed by his superior, Kwon Yul, gathered the entire Korean fleet, slightly over 200 ships, and set sail eastwards towards Busan.
Oh no.
However, the Japanese were well informed of the movements of the Korean fleet through their network of spies on the hills that overlooked Hansan-do. 3 days later, as the Korean ships neared Cholyong-do, they encountered the main Japanese fleet, which numbered 500 to 1,000 ships strong, already arrayed in a vast line. The battle had not even begun, and the Koreans were already on the back foot, exhausted from the long day at sea, and with little faith in their leader's abilities. Despite the odds being heavily stacked against him, Won Kyun ordered a general attack. The Japanese feigned a retreat, with the Koreans pursuing them, but afterwards they turned and drove them back. After repeatedly moving back and forth, the Japanese decided to finally attack with all their might. In this charge, they managed to destroy 30 Korean vessels, and because of this, the rest of the terrified Korean fleet soon routed. Despite
embarrassing. Literally though, like when you saw Yi in action, it's like everything was so one-sided, just the sheer skill he had. And then you look at here, and it's just like the difference is jarring, right? It really goes to show you the importance of the leader. Like, yeah, like the Korean Navy is still the same Navy that, like, you know, Yi used. It's just without him, it's just not good. And again, like, you know, you can have like the best army in the world, but if you don't know how to use it, you will lose. It's like the saying Alexander the Great said, that quote, like, I'm not afraid of an army of lions led by a sheep, I'm afraid of an army of sheep led by a lion. Like, it's true though. Like, it's really who's in charge that makes a big difference.
This, the disaster was not yet over. Some of the ships, having reached Kadok Island, decided to make a quick stop to refresh their supplies in water. The island was garrisoned by a large Japanese force, and soon they were met with 3,000 soldiers under Shimazu Yoshihiro's banner, who killed about 400 Koreans and destroyed several more vessels. Whatever remained from the Korean fleet continued to retreat until they reached Chilcholyang, a narrow strait between Koje and Chilchon Island, and stayed there for a week. The defeat at Busan and the reprimand he received from Kwon Yu severely crippled Won's morale, who retired to his flagship and refused to talk to anyone, thus leaving the fleet headless. The Japanese, after having experienced defeat at the hands of Yi Sun-shin time and again, were now eager to exploit this naval success to its fullest, and so they pursued the Korean fleet westwards. Unaware of the incoming Japanese attack, Won Kyun did little to plan a defense or boost his men's morale. Finally, a few hours after midnight on August 28th, the Japanese fleet, numbering almost 500 ships and under the light of a full moon, reached Chilcholyang. 3 guns signaled the attack, and the Japanese fell upon their prey with arrows and gunfire. Any Korean ships which weren't set on fire were boarded, with their crews cut down. The Koreans, who were unaccustomed to night warfare and thoroughly demoralized, offered little resistance. Some of them tried to escape by landing on the nearby Koje Island, but as it had been on Kadok Island, they were met with a Japanese ambush party who mowed them down. Admiral Won also met his fate as he was trying to escape to the mainland. By dawn,
Just the pure incompetence is just making me laugh from Juan. Dude really went through this whole scheming and stuff just to essentially get himself killed, which Yi would have never allowed to happen. It's almost like an elaborate self-termination. I mean, granted, he didn't have the intention of that, but you get me, like, his actions directly led to his own demise. It's almost kind of hilarious. Like, you know what I mean? But the incompetence is insane, and bro, like, again, you have to applaud the Japanese. This whole ploy and then getting rid of Yi, or playing a part in that, it's just very smart on their part to try to get naval supremacy.
all but 13 ships would be lost. These ships were commanded by Baesol, who, having realized that the strait was a dangerous spot, had moved them further away. These 13 ships would later become the saviors of Korea at Myeongdong. News of the disaster reached Seoul soon after it occurred, and the king swiftly made the only decision he could, reinstating the disgraced Yi Sun-shin as supreme naval commander.
Thank God. But again, man, like, all this drama could have been avoided if they just listened to Yi. It's like, it's frustrating, but at least he got to come back. But again, like, if he had never been removed in the first place, he probably would have not died. I mean, granted though, Admiral Yi's death is actually amazing. It's one of the best deaths ever I think I've seen. Like, he went out with a literal bang, but you know what I mean, right? Like, it is kind of just a lot of loss and stuff, and the fleet that Yi had so built basically being, you know, ruined because of just dumb decisions. And I believe they don't give him enough. Well, no, they first refuse to give him enough to rebuild another one. He has to actually, like, tell them to. So again, like, they really tried sabotaging this dude so much. Poor Yi, bro. I'm glad he got a great ending though. Like, his end makes up for all the BS he went through in life.
With the seas around Korea now swept clean of enemy ships, the 2 Japanese ground thrusts began on September 11th, comprising Okita Hideie's 49,600-strong Left Army and Mori Hidetomo's 65,300-strong Right Army. This was to be a brutal and pitiless invasion, undertaken with a degree of savagery unseen in 1592. Hideyoshi's orders now were to mow down everyone universally, without discriminating between young and old, men and women, clergy and laity. With this in mind, the advance began.
Yo, Hideyoshi's on one, bro. He's pissed off from the constant L's that he took in the first part. He's like just now, he has a newfound ruthlessness. And the Japanese were already pretty ruthless, but like now it's just like, let's take it up a notch. Probably the humiliation of the first invasion just probably has like really pushed him over the edge, you know?
The army of the left marched through Chola province and reached the fortified town of Namwon on the 23rd of September 1597. The city was situated on a flat plain, with its only natural defense being a river flowing to the south that acted as a rather distant moat. Its walls were not very tall, about 4 meters high, but were plastered with shell lime, and tiny fragments of seashells made it glitter in the sun, creating an impressive spectacle. Between each gate and wall corner, a bastion was formed to provide flanking fire onto the gates. In the area around the city, there was an alternative defensive position just to the north, the Sanseong of Kyoyong. This mountain fortress was naturally more suited to withstand the Japanese attack, as the enemy would have to fight an uphill battle through a heavily forested area. Because of this, the Korean garrison of Namwon had advocated for abandoning the city and moving there. However, the Ming general Yang Yuan, perhaps more confident in defending a Chinese-style fortification, overruled them and chose to stay in Namwon, a decision that would later prove to be fatal.
Yeah, I bet.
To Yang Yuan's credit, the Ming general didn't sit idly waiting for the arrival of the Japanese, but worked to strengthen the city's defenses. Another 3 meters were added to the wall's height, and cannons were placed on the main gatehouses. The defenders also dug a ditch 6 meters deep, enclosed by a wooden palisade, while spiked tree trunks were laid at its bottom to slow down the Japanese assault. Furthermore, a fortified water reservoir was built outside the walls to prepare the city for a lengthy siege, and fences were constructed on the fields. Finally, as the defenses were almost complete, Yang Yuan ordered the destruction of Kyoyong to prevent the coming Japanese from using it. When the Japanese army arrived...
Well, at least he tried to prepare. Like I said, I think it seems like he's not going to be successful, but at least he prepared. Like, all of this, I'm like, alright, at least he tried.
They immediately besieged the city from all sides, leaving no escape routes for the 12,000 people now trapped inside. Half of them were civilians. Hideie was in command of the southern sector, while Kanishi Yukinaga commanded the west. Kurashima Michifusa and Kato Yoshiaka's troops covered the northern side, and 11 other generals secured the eastern approach. Seeing that the invaders were busy with constructing their own defenses, the besieged garrison decided to sally out, but were met with rapid volleys of arquebus fire and were forced to retreat into the city. The next day, the Japanese started filling the city's defensive ditch with earth and straw, all while under heavy cannon, musket and arrow fire from the walls. When this was done, many of their own arquebusiers crossed over, and by taking cover in the burnt houses and the fences outside the walls, began to harass the defenders. That following evening, the Japanese sent a delegation asking for the defenders to surrender. This offer was, like on all other occasions, rejected. As a result, the Japanese resumed their offense with increased fervor, which continued well into the night despite heavy rain. The solution to the stalemate came for the besiegers in the form of a clever stratagem. Witnessing the still green rice stalks on the nearby fields, they cut them, then tied them together in big bundles. When darkness began to fall, the Japanese unleashed a heavy cannon barrage, accompanied by arquebus fire that lasted for 2 hours and forced the defenders to keep their heads down. Under the cover of night and the suppressive volleys of their guns, they quietly built a ramp out of the rice stalks. As the barrage stopped, the Japanese troops assaulted the walls, with the samurai Matsuura Shigenobu reportedly leading the way. Despite the valiant attempts of the defenders, the city fell. Seeing that the city was doomed, the Ming commander, Yang Yuan, led a detachment of 300 men out of the west gate, trying to break through the enemy lines. Despite being wounded twice, He and 100 of his men managed to escape the siege and headed to
Oh,
Cheonju,
dang.
only to find the city deserted. Thus he continued towards Seoul. Back at Namwon, the Japanese, now in total control of the city, put combatants and civilians alike to the sword. Kanan, a priest who was accompanying the army as a physician, was so shocked by what he witnessed that he later wrote in his poems, "Whoever sees this, out of all of his days, today has become the rest of his life." As a final act of barbarism,
Wow.
they cut off the noses of 3,726 dead, salted them, and then shipped them back to Japan as proof to Hideyoshi that they had fought and defeated their opponents.
Japanese and throughout most of their history were so terrifying and brutal. like honestly, like pre-nuked Japan is like one of the most terrifying groups of people. Anytime I learn about them, there's such a stark contrast to modern day Japan that I'm just like, holy crap, I'm glad you guys mellowed out, because man, Japan through most of its history was a terrifying force, bro.
Overall, in this second invasion, momentum had thus far been solely on Japan's side. However, the tide would begin to turn when a small number of Ming reinforcements, led by General Yang Hao, managed to ambush and defeat Japanese forces at Jiksan. This prevented any further incursions towards Seoul, and marked the furthest Japan would encroach into Korean territory.
Oh, wow.
The daunting prospect of more gigantic Chinese armies joining the Koreans, and a forthcoming winter, meant that turning back south was the only realistic choice for the Japanese. With the invasion on land stalling in late 1597, it is here that Yi Sun-shin is thrust back into the limelight.
So yeah, obviously Admiral Yi gets the MVP award because, you know, he deserves it, but I have to give an honorary mention at least to the Ming. They have managed to keep the land ambitions of the Japanese in check through just sheer numerical superiority alone. So I will give it that, like, you know, granted Yi gets the MVP award, but the Ming, you guys get an honorary mention. You also contributed quite a lot to this effort, which is really good.
After being reinstated as naval commander in the south, the admiral had only 13 ships to work with. Nevertheless, his mere presence cheered up the local population, who often greeted him as a savior. "Our admiral has come again, now we can be safe," shouted one local peasant.
Again, bro, Yi proves that size matters not, because even with that, the dude, even when he was outnumbered, dude was just winning flawless victories. And that's a really heartwarming moment. I really like that, because yeah, the dude, if anyone deserves praise, it's Admiral Yi, bro. The man carried the entire thing. Well, you know, he is the MVP. I give him the MVP award of this entire series.
However great his bravery or ability, what could Admiral Yi do with only 13 ships against hundreds? Firstly, he set about reasserting discipline and order. Guards were posted to protect armories and storehouses. Cowardly officials were reprimanded and sent back to work. Officers and enlisted men were flogged for dereliction, and civilians were punished for any offense. Through these harsh means, Yi restored himself to what traditional Chinese military doctrine dubbed awesomeness, the mix of fear and respect a leader needed to command effectively.
Dang, dude. I've been saying this entire series, Admiral Yi is awesome. I was using the correct terminology for once. Oh, that's cool. Or should I say, that's awesome. Okay, Chinese term meaning unmanifest power to exert policy throughout a state or organization closest to the Roman Imperium. Awesomeness.
The mix of fear and respect a leader needed to command effectively. Reaching his small fleet at Huryongpo, he immediately retrofitted all vessels to serve as makeshift turtle ships, with sturdy timber sides and spiked roofs to protect the crews. When this was done, Yi sailed kilometers west to Aranpo, which had a more open harbor. It was about this time that Yi received intelligence that the main Japanese war fleet was after him, so he retreated to the island of Chindo, further to the west. A 13-strong scout fleet tried to destroy Yi on the 17th of October, but was fought off without much difficulty. In the days after this minor skirmish, the main Japanese fleet arrived at Arampo and began building up its strength. As they did, Yi spent his time carefully observing the properties of surrounding bodies of water, noting the current speed, direction, and time of the tide. Of particular interest to the admiral was the narrow Myeongyang Channel, a stretch of water only 250 meters wide at its narrowest point. The current was also the fastest in all Korea, moving at a faster speed than Japanese ships could travel. This was a perfect place to make a final stand. On October 24th, Yi received further intelligence that a 200-strong Japanese fleet was closing in on his position. In response, he pulled his fleet through the Myeongyang Strait the next day, anchoring his ships in the open water just outside it. Beyond Yi's 13 combat vessels was a long line of fishing boats packed with refugees. By arranging these vessels in a mock battle line, the admiral hoped that the Japanese would assume his own squadron was merely the vanguard of a larger force. That night, with everything set as he wanted, Yi summoned his commanders to an audience, telling them that "He who seeks death shall live, he who seeks his life shall die."
I remember that quote. Such awesomeness.
At dawn the next day, the main Japanese armada of 200 to 300 vessels approached the southern end of the Myeongyang Strait. As Yi had predicted, this huge mass of ships was unable to pass through the narrow channel of Myeongyang in one group, and thus began to split into separate squadrons. Everything was going according to Yi's plan. It was only when the first...
This dude's such a genius, like, using the geography to, like, do everything he can to hamper the Japanese's superior numerical force and give him the advantage, despite his meager numbers. Again, just... how can you not like Admiral Yi?
Enemy ships began to emerge into the open water that Yi ordered the attack. The Japanese fleet had not realized the Koreans were there, but they were finally notified by the cannons and fire arrows that began to attack them. However, as the admiral's flagship blasted the stunned enemy warships, the other ships in his fleet began to lag behind, witnessing the extraordinary odds they faced. However, threats of punishment and Yi's dogged determination motivated his captains to catch up and fight. At this point, the meager 13-ship Korean fleet was completely enveloped by at least 130 Japanese vessels.
This battle is insane. Like, if you told me those odds, 13 ships versus hundreds, I would think, and you told me that the 13 ships have won, I would have thought you were mad. But the fact that this happened and that he pulls off the W, like, again, like, he might just be the greatest admiral to ever exist. I know that there's debate and there's definitely other great admirals, but, like, just the sheer numerical odds of his battles and taking the least amount of casualties, I could not argue if someone said he was the best. In fact, even I kind of just want to say Admiral Yi's the best admiral ever. You know? I don't know many admirals, but, like, of the ones I do know, I think I would put him above all. And, I know what's coming, and I'm really sad about it.
That ensued was unlike anything the Korean Navy had ever experienced before. Outnumbered by biblical proportions, their stronger ships rammed their weaker counterparts with reinforced prows, blasted them from all sides with point-blank cannon fire, and set them alight with fire arrows. The massive Japanese flagship suffered the brunt of this battering and was soon in flames, and sunk shortly after. Despite outnumbering their foes by such a massive margin, the Japanese still could not even touch Yi's ships. Assault after assault was made up the Narrows by the...
It's just the sheer skill gap, bro. Admiral Yi makes everyone else look like a child. He's just great.
The numerically superior Japanese, but Yi's flagship stood like a castle at the mouth of Myeongyang, leading the defense which repelled each attack. Then, as the Great Admiral had anticipated, Myeongyang's northward current suddenly reversed, pulling the attacking Japanese ships back into the narrows. They quickly became bunched together, some even smashing into one another and sinking. At this moment, the Koreans attacked with the tide at their back, inflicting massive casualties on the hapless Japanese fleet as the clash—
The literal turn of the tide. Again, just the perfect battle. Just everything. The skill, the numbers, disadvantage, the use of geography, the use of better quality of leadership. Just, this is everything you could ask for in a battle. The dramatic death, like, this is honestly, like, Admiral Yi's death might be one of the greatest deaths in history. Like, he went out with one of the biggest W's ever. Like, I know it's tragic that he died for sure, but like, man, I think going out like this is probably even better than like living for many more years, because he just went out at like the peak of his glory, the peak of his performance, the peak of his life. He went out. You know what I mean? The peak of his military career. Like, you know? Which I think in its own way is even a better way to go. But man, just, I'm sorry. This entire series has just been me glazing Yi, and like, I can't help it, dude. Like, Yi is just that awesome.
Shifted back into the narrows. By the time Hideyoshi's reinforced fleet managed to squeeze back through the narrows and into open water, 31 of its ships had been destroyed. Once again, Admiral Yi had lost no ships at all.
Oh, bro. Wait, this isn't the battle he dies? Wait.
Badly shaken by their experience in the Channel, the Japanese armada fell back all the way to Busan. It would not gain access to the Yellow Sea, nor would it venture this far west to challenge Yi again. Unfortunately for the triumphant commander, bad news arrived a month after the victory at Myeongyang. His son had been killed defending his home from invading Japanese soldiers. Yi was deeply affected by this and fell into a deep depression. Carrying this weight on his shoulders, he nevertheless began to rebuild the Joseon Kingdom's naval power. By March of 1598...
Dang, I got the battle wrong? Wait. Crap, this was the battle where he perished. Well, never mind. Either way, still, bro, that doesn't take away what I said earlier. Dude really went out at his best. And again, 13 versus hundreds, and he came out with no... Come on, bro.
61 warships were ready for combat, and a further 39 were under construction at the many shipyards of Korea. Accompanying the successes at sea were further victories on land. Ming reinforcements had arrived, and joining with the Korean forces, now pinned the land armies of Hideyoshi in their chain of coastal fortresses. Then, on September 18, 1598, Toyotomi Hideyoshi passed away, at the age of 62. This was the final nail in the coffin of Japan's attempted Korean conquest. One of the great Kwampaku's final orders was for the conflict to be brought to an end, and for all soldiers to return home. Both Hideyoshi's son Hideyori and other powerful daimyo, such as Tokugawa Ieyasu, were also eager to see the costly war stopped. In addition, the Ming were receptive to the idea of allowing Kanishi Yukinaga and the other Wajo garrisons to escape back to their homeland unharmed. The vengeful Koreans, however, were not going to accept this. Putting Korea's newfound dominance at sea to good use, Admiral Yi tightly blockaded Yukinaga inside Suncheon. Despite Yi's insistence that the Japanese would not be allowed to escape, Yukinaga's diplomatic pressure on the Chinese eventually allowed one ship to escape. This craft then signaled the rest of Japan's Wajo naval forces to rendezvous inside the bay at Sacheon to prepare for the voyage home. After Yukinaga failed to show up, the Japanese forces realized the situation he was in and sent 500 ships to break the blockade. Informed by scouts and local fishermen as to what was happening, Yi anticipated that the Japanese would take the direct route between Sacheon and Suncheon through the Noryang Strait. He was correct. having drawn up his ships in the open sea just west of the narrow strait, a surprise attack was launched at 2 AM on the 17th of December 1598. Within hours, almost half the Japanese fleet was burned or sunk. Admiral Yi was in the thick of the fighting, wielding a bow personally when the Allied Chinese flagship was attacked. By dawn, Japan's ships were retreating, and Yi ordered a ceaseless pursuit. As the Koreans caught up, a stray arquebus ball from a Japanese sharpshooter struck Yi Sun-shin in the left armpit. The great admiral was dead in minutes, but 450 out of the 500 enemy ships were shattered at Noyang. The tactical brilliance shown by Yi in this battle at Myeonyang, Hansan-do, and others had probably saved Korea. To this day, Admiral Yi Sun-shin is among Korea's most venerated historical figures.
And again, I like a quick fact about his death I liked is that apparently, yeah, he knew he was dying and he was like, keep playing the drum, like, you know, don't let everyone know I'm gone yet, you know, for the morale, and then he just went out like that. You know, his literal dead body still moving his soldiers on to fight. Like, that's such a beautiful, like, even at the end, the man was strategic to the end. He knew he needed to go out with one last W, and he, you know, made the last call. That really probably did help with that. Again, bro, I'm glad he you know, like I said, I think if there are two ways to go out, most preferred is to live a long life and to die of natural causes. I think that's the one most people would want. But like, I think the second best option is to go out in a blaze of glory. And I think Yi took the second option. And his death, he ought to be, like, again, like, if I found out, like, if I had a death like that, I would be so happy if I went out in, like, an epic blaze of glory, being a hero to my, like, nation, and getting one last W before you go out. Him and Nelson have that in common. Both great admirals who prevented the invasion of outside... Wait, they have a lot in common, what the fuck? Both dying in blazes of glory in battles that helped secure their land. Wow. Yeah, now I'm thinking about it, Nelson and Yi have way too much in common. That's kind of creepy, now that I actually sit down and think about it. Still, though, bro, he went out amazing. I love Admiral Yi, guys. I love the man.
By the closing days of 1598, all Japanese forces had left Korea. With their departure, the devastating 6-years-long conflict was finally over. Nevertheless, the effects of the war would be profound for all three nations that took part in it. In 1600, the only prominent daimyo who avoided draining his resources in the costly Korean expedition, Tokugawa Ieyasu, was able to triumph over a...
Ieyasu, bro. The ultimate opportunist, bro, just took it all. He was like, don't mind if I do. He just stole Hideyoshi's, like, and his family's, like, position. That's one of the funniest, like, things ever. The guy was smart, like, very cunning, you know?
Coalition of his enemies at Sekigahara. Many of the daimyo who were defeated in that battle had fought in Korea, including Okita Hideiie, Mori Hidimoto, and Kanishi Yukinaga. As we might expect, Yukinaga's bitter rival, Kato Kiyomasa, fought on the other side, and finally got his own back. As a result of Sekigahara, the Tokugawa clan would rule Japan for 2.5 centuries to come. The victorious Ming and Joseon dynasties were gravely weakened by the war with Japan, making them easy prey for other invaders from the north. In 1644, the 278-year-old Ming dynasty finally collapsed due to a fatal cocktail of internal rebellion and Manchu intervention. Their subsequent Qing dynasty would last until 1912 and would prove to be generous overlords to the Koreans, whose hermit kingdom remained independent and largely cut off from the world until Japan's imperial restoration in the late 1800s.
Wow.
Special thanks to our sponsor, Tokyo.
And that, my... you got a Japanese sponsor? Oh, that's awesome. We sponsor you. Wait, is it a Japanese sponsor? Wait.
In the late 1800s. Special thanks to our sponsor Tokyo Treat
Oh.
and Sakura Co. Get $5 off a box of Japanese treats with
That's so funny. Let's talk about one of Japan's big L's will sponsor you. I'm sorry, I'm having fun, guys. But yeah, Admiral Yi, bro, he's so great. He's like one of the, again, I'm a guy who doesn't care about naval warfare. I don't find it as interesting to learn about as land warfare. Like, naval and aerial warfare, I just don't care about. I never had an interest in it, but like Admiral Yi is like one of the few who I'm like, oh my gosh, I could just watch this guy in action all day, you know? He's great, and I think he had one of the best deaths in human history, bro. Guy went out like a total Giga Chad. He gets the MVP award, and another great series by Kings and Generals. I very much enjoyed it. And we'll end right here, and tomorrow I'll start something else. Bye, everyone.